The Oakland Church of the Nazarene gladly welcomes you to our presentation of the Living Last Supper. It is our hope that you will be richly blessed this evening and throughout your Easter season. We will begin with some historical information about the Last Supper painting and the artist Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was born on April 15, 1452, in the small Italian village of Vinci, from which he gets his name, Leonardo of Vinci. At age 14, he went to the Cultural Center of Florence to study painting and sculpture. By age 20, he was widely recognized as one of the most accomplished artists throughout Italy. His brilliant and inquisitive mind also led him to study such diverse topics as architecture, physics, astronomy, and anatomy. Many of his study notes have been preserved and continue to amaze present-day scholars. Da Vinci is known for many masterpiece paintings, including the Mona Lisa and Madonna. Most of his works were commissioned by the Church, which explains their religious nature. But the best-known work of Da Vinci, by far, is The Last Supper. Da Vinci was commissioned by the Duke of Milan in 1496 to paint the Last Supper in the dining hall of the convent of Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan, Italy. It took Da Vinci 2 years to complete the masterpiece, intended to capture the moment that Christ tells his disciples that one of them will betray him. Each of the disciples have a look of shock at the words that one of them, one of the Messiah's loyal followers, would betray him. Due to the age of the plaster and the humid conditions of the region, the painting has deteriorated and needed numerous restorations throughout the centuries, with the last occurring in the 1990s. These restorations have been based on drawings and early reproductions of the original Da Vinci painting. At one point in the 1600s, when the painting was in poor condition, a doorway was cut through the wall in the lower part of the painting. The doorway was removed, but is still visible. At the opposite end of the hall is Montalfano's crucifixion painting, which was completed in 1495, just as Da Vinci was preparing to start working on the Last Supper. During World War II, the paintings were in peril as Allied forces began bombing Milan and surrounding cities. The citizens of Milan, fearing the loss of their masterpiece, sandbagged and reinforced the wall before it could be destroyed. Allied forces did in fact bomb the convent, leveling most of the structure, save the reinforced walls. Thanks to the efforts of the local people, the Da Vinci masterpiece survived to be enjoyed by generations to come. We now present the Living Last Supper. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent 2 of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover.
Savior, like a shepherd, lead us. Much we need thy tender care. In thy pleasant pastures feed us. For our use thy folds prepare. Blessed Jesus, blessed Jesus, thou hast bought us, thine we are. Blessed Jesus, blessed Jesus, thou hast bought us, thine we are.
Take and eat, all of you. This is my body, broken for you. This is the blood of my covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Drink. Truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me.
Surely, Lord, it's not I.
Bartholomew, often referred to in Scripture as Nathanael, first learned of Jesus through his good friend Philip, as he sat under a fig tree, listening to him proclaim that he had found the long-awaited Messiah, foretold of long ago by Moses and other prophets. Bartholomew's first encounter with Jesus, found in the book of John, chapter 1, indicates that he had some formal education, as he was knowledgeable of prophetic scriptures, which could have caused him to question Philip. But when Bartholomew met Jesus, his life was instantly transformed, and he became a converted believer, committed to follow his newfound Messiah. Tradition states that he became a missionary to Armenia, where he died a brutal death, a martyr proclaiming the good news of salvation.
Not I, Messiah.
James the Lesser, as he has become known, was not as insignificant as his name may indicate. Although there is no record of his sayings or deeds, his name appears in every list of the 12, including the roll call of those who, after the death and resurrection of Jesus, formed the nucleus of the early Christian church. Born the son of Alphaeus, he may very well have been the brother of Matthew and was a good friend of Thaddeus. History shows that he preached in Palestine and Egypt and died a martyr for his faith, being crucified in Egypt.
Whoa, none of us, Master.
Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, was a fisherman from Bethsaida on the Sea of Galilee and an early disciple of John the Baptist, which is where he learned of the coming Messiah. This may explain why he so quickly and eagerly followed the call of Jesus to discipleship. Andrew, his brother Simon Peter, James the Greater, and John were all in the fishing business together. Andrew introduced his brother Simon Peter to Christ along the shores of the Galilean Sea, where he made them fishers of men and the first apostles. Andrew is mentioned throughout Scripture, most notably as the disciple who brought the small boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish at the feeding of the 5,000. He would go on to preach the gospel in such lands as Macedonia, Greece, Turkey, and even Russia. He died a martyr in Greece in 69 AD, crucified on an X-shaped cross, now commonly referred to as a St. Andrew's cross.
How could this be, Lord?
Simon Peter's journey took him from humble fisherman to the one Jesus would call the rock of his church. He is widely recognized as the spokesman for the 12 disciples, with his responses for the entire group recorded numerous times in Scripture. Peter was part of the inner circle of disciples and one of only 3, along with James and John, that accompanied Jesus to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray before he was taken and arrested. Historians refer to him as the impulsive one, and he is recognized as the sword-wielding apostle that cut off the ear of the high priest's servant when the mob came for Jesus. But Peter also showed his very weak and human side by denying Christ 3 times after he was arrested, just as Jesus had predicted. But even with his faults, Peter was perhaps the greatest preacher of the 12 apostles, with his bold Pentecostal message leading to 3,000 souls being baptized and received into the church. He died for his faith, being crucified on a cross, but insisting that he be hung upside down, feeling unworthy to imitate his master in his final hour.
None amongst us would betray you.
A fisherman from Bethsaida, John was born the son of Zebedee and the brother of James the Greater. John and James, part of that inner circle along with Peter, were referred to in Scripture as the sons of thunder, being strong-tempered and very protective of Jesus. Under the teaching of Jesus, though, he would eventually become known as the Apostle of Love, the beloved disciple. John spent his life teaching in the churches of Asia Minor, especially Ephesus. However, unlike the other disciples, he did not die a martyr. After being exiled for 18 months to the Greek island of Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation, John was released and died of natural causes 5 years later in Ephesus.
You don't mean me.
A fisherman from Galilee, Thomas was one of the most loyal, devoted, and conscientious members of Jesus' cabinet. But one very human moment following the resurrection saddled him with the nickname, the Doubting Thomas. When he received the report of Christ's resurrection, he was skeptical and would not believe until Jesus appeared to him and the other disciples. Jesus showed him his wounds, and Thomas fell to his knees and exclaimed, "My Lord and my God." He moved from disbelief to belief, uncertainty to certainty, from doubt to dedication. He spent the rest of his days proclaiming his faith in modern-day Iran, Persia, and India, where he was martyred at a location now known as Mount St. Thomas.
This can't be, Master.
James the Greater, as he has become known, was the son of Zebedee and the brother of John. He was a fisherman in Bethsaida who dropped his nets and left behind the comforts of home, family, and security to follow Jesus and become one of the sons of thunder. He was close to Jesus, being one of the few to follow Jesus into the garden to pray during his final hours. Accepting the Master's call affected some revolutionary changes in James's life, and his nature was transformed. He became an effective and creative instrument in the building of the church. He died a martyr, being beheaded by King Herod Agrippa in 44 AD.
Is it I, Lord?
Also from the tiny fishing village of Bethsaida, Philip was the fifth disciple chosen by Jesus. He was first a disciple of John the Baptist, where he learned of the coming Messiah. Philip was also a good friend of Peter's, but unlike the sometimes impulsive and hot-tempered Peter, history records Philip as a more passive, practical, and analytical disciple. Some might even say that he was timid in nature, but he nonetheless introduced Bartholomew to Jesus Christ and went on to be a force in the early church and a great presence in Asia Minor, dying a martyr's death in Hierapolis, located in modern-day Turkey.
But we are your loyal followers, Lord.
Very little is known about the disciple from Capernaum, except that Matthew was called from a very different life than that of his fellow disciples. Matthew served as a publican or tax collector for the Roman government. This was no doubt a very lucrative occupation, as Matthew would have been limited only by his creativity in the amount he collected, with any extra monies going into his own pocket. Tax collectors like Matthew were despised by the Jewish population, which made it even more remarkable that Jesus asked him to be his follower, his disciple. Matthew's quick acceptance of the Messiah's call showed that Matthew desired to change his ways and live his life in service to the one true God. Matthew died a martyr for his faith in Ethiopia.
That can't be true.
There is little mention of Thaddeus in the scriptures, but we do know that he was from Galilee, and either a close friend or perhaps even a brother of James the Lesser. Although he seems inconspicuous in the written scriptures, ancient historical accounts and tradition document his work and witness in the early church. He shared his faith in the message of forgiveness in Persia and Armenia, dying a martyr's death in agonizing torture from the wounds of arrows.
Lord, who is it?
Simon the Zealot, as he was known, is a rather obscure character, with the exception of being in the 4 biblical listings of the 12 apostles. The Zealots were an underground group that despised the domineering yoke of Rome and committed to the overthrow of their tyrannical government by any means necessary, including violence and assassination. Somehow, Simon fell under the influence of Jesus and committed his life to further the message of the Messiah. He grew from a revolutionary fanatic to a preacher of universal love. He remained a loyal and devoted servant of the church until his death by crucifixion. Judas, a name synonymous with betrayal, was the only non-Galilean disciple chosen by Christ, being born and raised in Judea, close to the Sinai desert. Scripture indicates that Judas thought the Messiah would have an earthly kingdom, and perhaps felt that Jesus had misled the disciples, which may have led to his quick betrayal. Nonetheless, Jesus did all he could to include Judas in his special circle of friends, entrusting him with the treasury and even calling him friend in the garden after his traitorous kiss. Jesus saw Judas at his worst, yet spoke to him tenderly. There was no condemnation, only love. He would have forgiven his betrayer, but Judas failed to grasp his opportunity. He betrayed his Lord for 30 pieces of silver. Following Jesus' arrest and crucifixion, overcome by guilt and remorse, he ended his own life, and so died the most tragic figure in history.
Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. Judas, you have said it is so. What you must do quickly.
When supper was done, Jesus went to the garden to pray. Jesus went to the garden to pray with several of his disciples. After some time, Judas arrived with the mob and betrayed the Messiah with a kiss. Jesus was taken, tried, beaten, and crucified. His body was laid in a tomb, the stone rolled across the entrance, and Roman soldiers posted as guards. It was one of the darkest days in history. But we know that Christ rose again on the third day, appeared to his disciples, and ascended to heaven. And the Messiah is still looking for disciples even today.
Will you be one?